Doom is a game of such historic video game importance that it goes without saying that it is and forever will be a core component of video games as an art form. But what of its sequel, Doom 2? You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and this week I'm taking a look at Doom 2 and several of its expansions, including the Night Dive and Machine Games designed Legacy of Rust, after finishing them for the first time. As the title of this video suggests, I very much enjoyed my time with Doom 2. However, my take on this game is definitely going to be more nuanced than that title may suggest at a glance. Doom 2's place in gaming history is a bit more conflicted than the original title, as Doom 2 is simultaneously well loved and incredibly reviled by gaming audiences of the present day and past. Over the years, I've heard both that this game is one of the best ever designed and that it is a massive disappointment following Doom, making its only lasting legacy the mod scene that's risen in its wake. Both of these impressions are not mine, as I would myself say the original Doom is the better game overall. However, Doom 2 is still a masterclass in vintage boomer shooter game design, with loads of awesome levels, innovations upon the blossoming FPS genre of its time period, and an implementation of shifting game design principles that are additive to the core framework established in the first game. This is an unruly subject to look at in this day and age, so let's take a step back and look at the legacy of Doom to see if Doom 2 is a good follow-up to one of the most important games ever made. Doom 2 has big shoes to fill, and it does so mostly even if I still think Doom 1993 is the better game. I'm not going to say something like it's unfair to compare Doom 2 to Doom because of the latter being one of the most important games ever designed, because it is a sequel to that game. So there is an element of expectation that goes into the evaluation of Doom 2. I went into the game wanting it to be as good as Doom at least, and it isn't. That being said, Doom 2 is a cut above its contemporary boomer shooters from the 90s. I've played loads of them, from the more mainstream ones like Unreal, Quake, and Duke Nukem 3D, to the more obscure ones from that same decade like Blake Stone, Rise of the Triad, Blood, and others. It's one of my favorite genres, and if there's any section of the indie video game sphere I pay consistent attention to, it's what boomer shooters are coming down the pipeline. Doom 2, and I'm just talking about the base game here, is a perfectly competent 90s era shooter that stands as high as the other giants from that era. They all live in the shadow of Doom, but you'll be hard-pressed to find someone saying games like Hectic, Hexen, or Shadow Warrior are bad games just because they don't have the same lasting legacy as 1993's Doom. The truth of the matter is that all of these games, including Doom 2, are excellent vintage games, and Doom 2 is better than many of them in my opinion. There's loads of reasons id designed games in the 90s were a cut above the competition, and Doom 2 demonstrates their masterful design ideas from this era in some ways better than 1993's Doom. Difficulty, level design, enemy compositions, and weapon variety are the four pillars upon which a boomer shooter lives and dies, and in these categories, Doom 2 demonstrates a strong command of the communication that takes place between designer and player, especially given the slower drip feed of feedback that existed back in the 90s. Subtlety is the resounding voice lost in silence, displaying the designer's ideals for the player to view, and in this way, it's not hard to see why elements of Doom 2 rub certain players the wrong way. As you'll see soon, the difficulty design of Doom 2 shifts the focus of the gameplay loop away from the one established in the first game in a way that will ruin the experience for someone that doesn't pick up on what the designers were going for. Ultraviolence is the difficulty by which Doom, as a franchise, is best played during a first playthrough. As such, I played through Doom 2 and all of its expansions in this difficulty mode, and this incredibly boosted my enjoyment with the game. Most of the difficulty is good old Doom. The number of enemies increases with each difficulty level, which is why Ultraviolence feels like the intended experience, since it requires the full use of the player's toolkit and has a nice margin of error for the player as well. The key difference between Doom and Doom 2's design is readily apparent at high difficulties as well, much more so than they would be on lower settings. Resource management and the higher importance placed upon this game design ideal is the big thing separating the two games. The best example of this that I have is how Mission 9 The Pits and Mission 10 Refueling Base flow into one another. The Pits is loaded with enemies, and the ammo drops afforded the player are barely enough to keep them ahead of the sheer onslaught of demonic dudes. By the time I'd finished the level, all I had left to my name name was 31 health, 9 shotgun shells, 11 rockets, and 21 energy cells. Needless to say, this is a poor position to be in for a Doom game, especially on ultra-violence, where hordes of demons are especially common. So what did I do to handle this situation? Did I reload an old save and play through the previous level, managing my inventory of armaments a bit better? Did I turn on God mode and run through the level? No. As I always do on my first playthroughs of games, I hunkered down and muscled through this mess, and by the end, refueling base would become one of my favorite levels in the game as a result. The sign of a great classic Doom level is how viable it is to make it all the way through, low on life and resources, and refueling base is designed in such a way to meet the definition of its title. It is here where the player is supposed to learn how to refuel when they've hit rock bottom on resources, which is a skill that would come in handy many times over the course of my playthrough. You see, the chainsaw has always been an iconic element of Doom games. In the first title, the chainsaw was fun, but outside of being a hard counter to Pinky Demons, there isn't much of a reason to pull it out. In Doom 2, this is not the case. Interestingly, the chainsaw in this game functions just like the chainsaw in Doom Eternal, as I needed to use it to preserve and get ahead on the ammo economy side of the gameplay loop. As a result, I wonder if this element of Doom 2's design is something the modern id team was trying to replicate in Eternal. In a lot of ways, Doom 2 reminds me a lot of how Doom Eternal is designed relative to Doom 2016. Likewise to the relationship between the first two Doom games, 2016's Doom is better than Eternal in my mind, and just like Doom 2, this doesn't make Eternal bad. In refueling base, the player is faced with two choices at the start. They can either go left into this dark room that has a secret pain elemental, or they can go right to this wide open space with 4 mini rooms hosting sardine-packed demons. A mixture of the two, slowly plodding through, is the only way to approach this level at the low resource count I was dealing with, and this forced me to think carefully about my available resources. Pain elementals are no joke, and in throngs of demons, they are the most important to prioritize, assuming there isn't an archvile running amok. I'll get to these different demons later on in this video, but for right now, pain elementals are the only thing I need to talk about specifically. Pain elementals, these sorry sons of guns, spit out lost souls infinitely if left unchecked, and they can turn a hellish area into something truly devilish if not eliminated the instant they appear. That's why I often bum rush them whenever I saw them, especially in the base game where resources are more tight and the ammo drops are more carefully placed to force the player to engage with the resource management focus of Doom 2. As I played through refueling base, I had to calculate how many shells I spat out versus how much I was taking in, almost as if Doom 2 had become a sordid sort of financial sim, wheeling and dealing death and pain being the only investment worthwhile and coincidentally tariff-proof. I love the tycoon sims of yore. Railroad Tycoon, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Zoo Tycoon, Sim City, it doesn't matter, and this type of level and game design really honed in on this aspect of my personal gaming tastes in an unexpected way. Keeping a solid expense sheet in my head while maintaining an outward appearance of stolid stoicism made the raw combination of enemies and ammunition availability something that makes Doom 2 better in my mind. However, this sort of design is the high point of Doom 2's difficulty, as one of the key critiques of Doom 2's design is tied to its level constructions, namely the ways in which gacha-style trap implementation permeates certain stages. Mission 8, Tricks and Traps, is the first major offender in this sort of design, and truly the level is fine once you know the order you're supposed to go in, and that's the key thing. This level sucks so much before you know what room you're supposed to go in first, turning it into an exercise in trial and error, which is never fun in a boomer shooter of Doom 2's ilk. It's one of those things where the rough and bad levels in Doom 2 pollute the well for some players, which I totally understand as someone who just played through roughly 129 levels of this game in about a month and a half. That being said, for every bad or rough level in Doom 2, there's 2 or 3 truly fun ones. Obviously, I'm a fan of what Doom 2 brings to the Doom formula. However, there are aspects of the level design that warrants the criticism this game often receives online. One key critique the boomer shooters of yore receive is how they approach key hunting and how this relates to the distribution of their murder rooms and level design. The original Doom masterfully navigates the balance of these things, with maybe 1 or 2 levels that aren't up to snuff, although I can't think of any off the top of my head. In Doom 2, I can think of a few right off the cuff that I would point to and say, this this level is Donkey Dukes. At a first glance, Tricks and Traps would be one of these types of levels, but as I said in the previous section, this level gets much better once you've figured out the order you're supposed to go in and where the trial and error design of the level is levied the most. The fact that there are trial and error traps at all in this sort of game is a bit of a negative, but this level is hardly one that I would call reprehensibly bad. Very few levels in Doom 2 are actually confusing, and there's only a few instances of me getting lost and running in circles looking for the path of progression. Instead of arrows acting as navigation, Doom 2 uses demon spawns to direct the player towards their next goal, which adds to my contention that ultra-violence is the ideal way to play this game. More demons creates clarity in terms of where the player is supposed to go next. The only level this guiding principle did not help me in was Mission 15, Industrial Zone. Now, I play games guideless on my first playthrough, and I do this because going through a game blind typically improves the experience, making the game more memorable and forcing me to overcome any obstacles created by my own errors. For example, there's this iconic area of Final Fantasy Tactics called Riovane's Castle, where the player is able to lock themselves into a sequence of incredibly difficult levels. Once you're in, the only way out is to load a previous save. However, when I was a kid, I would just use one save to trim the number of blocks I needed to use on my PS1 memory card. This meant that because I didn't know about this section, I had to brute force my way through the castle, and eventually I would succeed. I think about this event all the time whenever I'm starting a new game because it foundationally improved my appreciation of Final Fantasy Tactics. Likewise, I've had many other such moments in my gaming history over time. It's important to encounter challenges and overcome them. The reason I tell this story, which may not seem pertinent when taken at face value, is because the design of Industrial Zone caused me to break my cardinal rule of playing games. I had to look up a guide to figure out how to beat the level. Now, in the Final Fantasy Tactics example, I was a kid and the challenge I was presented with was something gameplay focused. In Industrial Zone, running around in circles like a headless chicken for 30 minutes felt like such a waste of my precious little adult time that I just wasn't willing to spend another second on this particular level. And guys, this level's solution is stupid. The red key I had so much trouble acquiring requires the player to go through an unintuitive movement pattern to acquire. It's actually pretty simple once you know what to do. However, I did not move in that way despite running across the teleport pad tied to it several times. Instead, I followed a speedrun guide for the level, which ended up directing me towards the secret exit. All in all, this was a good place to get frustrated since it added more content to my playthrough. It doesn't change the fact that it's stupid though. It doesn't help that Industrial Zone is followed by Suburbs, which actually is mostly a pretty great level. I got a little confused on how to exit the level, but eventually I figured it out. Something I see online all the time is how people hate the city levels, and because of levels like Industrial Zone and the tricky exit on Suburbs, this is a criticism that I honestly get, even if I don't personally agree with it myself. You see, Mission 13, Downtown, is one of my favorite stages in the game, and it's the one that is most focused on the city-based level design. Conceptually, one of my favorite things about Doom 2 is how Hell comes to Earth, and the way this campaign moves from Starport to Earth before dipping down to Hell is quite cool. From the Starport section of the game, I'm quite partial to Mission 4, The Focus, and Mission 5, The Waste Tunnels, specifically because of how lighting is used in these two levels. In The Focus, the designers utilize darkness and shadows to great effect, and it's crazy impressive they were able to create this look and vibe in the bygone pre-ray tracing days of old. Specters coming out of the darkness in this particular level is super spooky and makes the connection between classic Doom and horror much clearer. It's no surprise then that they would continue the franchise in this direction with Doom 64 and Doom 3. Midway being the designers for Doom 64 is a stroke of genius because they just had this way of creating atmospheric horror back in the day. Midway era MK is a perfect example of this. The shadows in these early stages foreshadows this design shift, one that modern Doom games have failed to replicate. The Waste Tunnels takes this even further with the way the minigun's muzzle flare lights up the dark sections of the stage, revealing imps hidden in the dark. I've already talked a lot about the city section of Doom 2's campaign, but Downtown and Suburbs are the real standouts in this section. Compared to Starport, the fact that the city levels rub people the wrong way makes a lot of sense since, on average, they aren't as impressive as what immediately precedes them. I do find them to be overhated though, as other than a few duds like Industrial Zone, which isn't even bad beyond the red key, these levels really aren't that terrible at all. Several of them are even loads of fun. It's the Hell section of the game that holds the other two levels I didn't like in Doom 2. Considering there's only 3, that's not too bad. Loads of other games I count among the best ever made have far more than just 3 bad levels. It's one of those things where Doom 2's frustrating elements are micro-insults that likely build up over time for a lot of other players. For example, Mission 23, Barrels of Fun, is actually a pretty interesting and fun puzzle level most of the time. However, there's this section as the player finally escapes a room laden with pain elementals and loads of other demons where they're face down with an archvile and 2 chain gunners, which are the exact worst enemies to have to deal with after getting out of an insane gauntlet of explosive death. These are 2 of the 5 enemies in Doom 2 that have hit scan weapons, meaning they hit you the instant they pull the trigger. Unlike the other 3 enemies, the 2 variants of Zombie Soldier and Spider Mastermind, archviles and chain gunners are especially good at deleting health bars and are harder to avoid. This section of the level is what makes me dislike Barrels of Fun, because the placement of the enemies here is clearly done to get the player. Even when I knew these guys were here, the placement of them is super annoying to handle quickly. It doesn't help that right after the player handles this situation, they are faced with a Spider Mastermind and several Arachnotrons. This composition of enemies isn't a problem, it's just annoying after what the player has just dealt with. The other level I dislike in this section is Icon of Sin. I don't like this boss, and I find dealing with him super annoying, and this doesn't change in the expansions that choose to end with him as well. There's a reason the most modern Doom 2 expansion, Legacy of Rust, doesn't implement the Icon of Sin, because he just sucks. This is one thing Doom Eternal does laughably better than Doom 2, as the Icon of Sin boss fight in that game mirrors the mechanics of him in Doom 2, while also just being a fun boss to combat. Mission 24, the Chasm, and Mission 29, the Living End, are my favorite levels from this part of Doom 2, specifically due to the ways in which they use precarious footing in conjunction with precise movement. This creates some super challenging, in a fun way, combat encounters that I reflect positively upon when I look back at my time with this game. The level design, while not as good as 1993's Doom or id's other work from the same decade, Quake 1 and 2, isn't bad, and I do feel Doom 2's designed areas are better than loads of other boomer shooters from this same era, and as such, I consider it mostly a positive in Doom 2's favor. The criticism of the levels being easy to get lost in is one that I can't personally empathize with, as it didn't really happen to me. Like I said, I played on ultraviolence the whole way through, and that could have impacted my impression. I also play a lot of boomer shooters, both contemporary to Doom 2 and modern, meaning I'm used to the way designers communicate progression to the player via enemy placement. And if there's something else that massively boosts Doom 2's quality, it's the thing that really separates it from its 1993 predecessor, the new demons. There are 6 new demons introduced in Doom 2, which nearly doubles the raw number of enemies the player gets the privilege of ripping and tearing. Firstly, the chain gunners, often reviled by G-Man Lives, who's well known in the boomer shooter YT niche, are hit-scanning zombies equipped with miniguns. This means they are quite good at ripping the player's health and armor to shreds. However, I do think these guys are overhated in the base game of Doom 2. Now, I'm very careful with my wording here, as the chain gunners are deployed quite brutally in some of the Doom 2 expansions, namely in the final Doom episodes, TNT Evilution and the Plutonia Experiment, which I'll be getting to later in this video. Chain gunners are really not that bad most of the time though. The only times where they suck are when the developers were clearly trying to grab an easy gotcha style kill on the player, such as the area I mentioned previously in Barrels of Fun. Beyond that, these guys actually have a few startup frames to their attack, which allows the player a moment to dodge or interrupt their attack with murderous buckshot. So many of the most iconic Doom enemies are from this game, as Revenants are introduced in this title. I would say Revenants and Cacodemons are the poster boy demons of Doom, and it's interesting that one of them comes from the sequel and not from the first game. Revenants' homing missile is their most dangerous element, as those things will follow the player to the Rapture and back, and there's many times I've died to these after playing Ring Around the Rosie for a minute straight. It's a dangerous game to play, as failure leaves the player as a pocket full of posies, what's not burnt to ash anyway. The Mancubus and Arachnotrons are both introduced in Mission 7, Dead Simple. The Mancubus shoot a spread of fireballs at the player that are super fun to bob and weave through, and as such, Dead Simple's simple level design is the perfect introduction of these guys, giving the player enough space to practice dodging their projectiles. After killing all of them, the outside area of Dead Simple opens up, creating a path for the Arachnotrons to attack the player. These are just smaller spider masterminds with projectile plasma casters, making them actually pretty easy. They typically seem to function more as obstacle makers when mixed in with a mess of other demons, which plays well with the bullet hell framework of Doom 2's design. The two enemies that are the biggest pains in classic Doom are the Pain Elementals and Archvile, both of which are introduced in this game. Pain Elementals perpetually spit out lost souls, and upon death, they spawn more. What's interesting about their death trigger is the way the lost souls they spawn will instantly die if they shoot out of the Pain Elemental right into an obstruction of some kind. This detail makes positioning important when prioritizing these, especially if the player can back them up against a wall. Pain Elementals are painful to deal with, especially when they aren't dealt with quickly. However, this is actually a good thing for Doom 2's encounter design. You see, the player is propositioned to maneuver through a hellstorm of projectile missiles, fireballs, and plasma shot, which wouldn't be too challenging if they could take their time. Pain Elementals add an element of inevitability in the demon's favor should the player maintain too much of a defensive playstyle. Likewise, Archviles, mainly because of their ability to resurrect fallen demons, create the same sort of aggressive need in the player. They're a bit different though, as the Archviles are super dangerous to run at headlong. The player has to use the level design to their advantage against Archviles, breaking line of sight whenever the demon is gearing up to do their health spike. Within the base game of Doom 2, both of these enemies are deployed in strategic ways that bolster the encounter design of the game, most of the time. Like I said with the chain gunners, there are times when the Archvile is clearly deployed to get a cheap kill on the player, which always sucks. This isn't super common in the base game of Doom 2, but boy howdy, does it happen often in Final Doom. All of these elements together are the reason I love Doom 2 so much, and with that, I think it's time I close out this section of the review. I always answer the question, will this game make my top 100 of the decade of its release, at the end of each of my videos, but today is going to be a little bit different, as I want to talk about the expansions for Doom 2 as well. Because these things are a mixed bag most of the time, I don't want my impression of these expansions to impact my overall impression of Doom 2, because they don't. I knew going into this playthrough that these things are loaded with bad stuff, so my expectations were managed at the appropriate level. Let's get to that question, shall we? Doom 2 will be making my top 100 of the 90s list, and it'll be entering the list in the red category. Games in my various top 100 lists are split into blue and red categories, with red category games being ones that are immune to being removed until at least all blue tier games are removed first. Doom 2 will be replacing X-Men Apocalypse, which has been on the list since its original incarnation. The game, while not being as good as the original, is a masterclass of game design in my mind, another casual id Software masterpiece. A timeless one at that. That being said, Doom 2's legacy is partially polluted by the expansions that followed it, and I'd like to cover each of these briefly in this video as well. Let's start with the master levels. The master levels actually start out pretty okay. It's not until the Black Tower that I felt the designers of these started phoning it in, and certain levels such as Mission 9, the Garrison, are a lot of fun. It's a good sign that the first half of this expansion blended with my memories of the base game so much that I'd forgotten they were even a part of the master levels at all. One of the key things I praised in the base game is the way the designers worked the chainsaw into being more important for the ammo conservation section of the game's design. In the master levels, the player doesn't get the chainsaw via main route progression until the Garrison, which is neat and plays into the way this expansion really starts to go downhill from this point on. It's ironic that one of the key things I loved about the base game is so irrelevant within all of the expansions, so much so that the situation I talked about in regards to refueling base never happened again for the rest of my time with Doom 2. I do wonder if the reputation of the master levels hurt Doom 2 in the long run, because the levels here really do start to display a lot of the pitfalls of poor design that's likely to happen when community members gain access to the tools of creation. This is the sort of thing that happened with the two Mario Maker games, as trollish design is quite common when randos start designing levels. For example, there are several areas in the master levels where you'll fall down into a pit with no way out, meaning you've either got to reload or just sit there and wait to die. Pits into lava or acid exist in the first two Doom games, but its designers always created a way via a switch or elevator for the player to get out. They do that because it sucks to die by slipping while maneuvering around incoming projectiles, and it's a blemish on the design of these stages that this sort of thing is even possible. It's a shame because the first half of the master levels are quite fun, and I wish I could say that the downward spiral of the second half of these stages was the worst Doom 2 has to offer. They would be if Final Doom didn't take up the mantle and run with it, spawning some of the worst boomer shooter levels I've ever seen in my life. TNT Evilution is the first half of Final Doom, and there are some good, even great levels in this expansion. They are diamonds in the rough though, meaning most of the expansion is a slog to get through. Something I was reminded of while playing through Evilution is the way vintage games quite often allowed the player access to cheats to modify the game experience to their liking. It did get to the point where as soon as I became frustrated with the design of an area that I would put on God mode or something like that to run around the level, which did allow me to see certain aspects of levels that otherwise would be inaccessible. For example, Mission 27, Mount Pain, is one of my favorite levels from the expansion. As the name would suggest, there's this giant mountain in the background that is essentially beyond the player's reach during the level. However, with id clip turned on, I was able to run up and down the stage and begin to appreciate the grandiosity of the level in ways I couldn't during my non-cheat run. This particular stage is possibly my favorite from this expansion, partially because of how it reminds me somewhat of the final level, the Mars Assault sequence in XCOM UFO Defense. The winding corridors, loaded with a nigh unending slew of demons, backed by interesting environmental elements and enemy compositions, makes this level challenging in the perfect way. I do like how there's a level select feature in all these old Doom games, because it basically means I can just play the levels I enjoy from my time with it, ignoring everything else. Evilution has a fair few levels that are fun, but they're often sandwiched by stages I just don't like at all. And the Plutonia Experiment fares worse in this regard. Whoever designed the Plutonia Experiment absolutely loves Archviles, and the only thing they love more than Archviles is trolling the player with them at the worst possible times and placements. Mission 11, Hunted, is kind of funny at first with this, in terms of the way the Archviles just watch the player at the beginning before being teleported into the maze. That's the only entertaining part of the level though, because it sucks to play through. One Archvile is enough, and getting ambushed by one while fighting a second is just absolutely terrible. This expansion is also loaded with super confusing level layouts. I got lost once in the base game of Doom 2, and in the master levels and Evilution, I got lost just a handful of times. The Plutonia Experiment's levels are so confusing that I got lost running in circles quite often. The major offenders are levels like Mission 24, The Final Frontier. I spent so much time running around this level trying to find the exit that I refused to ever touch it again. There's a sort of exhaustion that starts to set in the bones in this expansion that by the end, when there is a cyber demon blocking the path to the Icon of Sin's weak point, I just said screw this, turned on id clip, and barrel stuffed Romero full of double barrel buckshot. That being said, there is at least one level in the Plutonia Experiment that stands out as being truly wonderful. Mission 26, The Bunker, is a good, honest, and fair Doom 2 level. In this way, it truly stands out amongst its Plutonia counterparts. I enjoyed plodding through this level, and by the end, I found several of the Demon Horde sections to be particularly enjoyable. Even the implementation of the Archviles in this level adds to the experience of the stage, rather than being an obnoxious barrier to good old boomer shooting fun. In this level, the Archviles begin to function as I said they should back in part 4 of this video. They create a need for the player to play a bit more aggressively to take them off the board before they can start snowballing, resurrecting too many demons for the player to have a chance of getting ahead. I even like the way the Revenants are deployed in these tight spaces, making dodging their homing missiles incredibly difficult at times. It's a good time, honestly. In general though, I dislike the level design and enemy implementation in the Plutonia Experiment so much that Plutonia is going to be my shorthand for poor level and encounter design from here on out. By this point, after over 90 levels of Doom 2, I was getting a tad burned out with the game. However, both unfortunately and fortunately for me, there's no rest for a living YouTuber in this content creation game. The show must go on. Thank God this expansion follows the Plutonia Experiment. This one is short and good pretty much all the way through. I don't like the levels as much as the base game, but there are several sections of this particular expansion that are quite fun. This is definitely more of an expansion of the first Doom, with just the added demon roster of Doom 2 thrown in. It didn't take me too long to get through this one, which definitely helped, and No Rest for the Living did a good job at giving me enough of a second win to make it through the final stretch of Doom 2 expansions. Fortunately, the ones that remained are tailored under the authorial gaze of Romero himself and some of the best FPS development studios in the business, Night Dive and Machine Games. The Sigil expansions, Romero's modern Doom creations, are the first ones to show off some real innovations upon classic Doom level design, making the inverse bell curve of my enjoyment with Doom 2 worthwhile. Once you've hit rock bottom, the only direction left is up, and that's what it's like going from Final Doom to No Rest for the Living and Sigil. Starting off, the idea of locking areas with eyeball sigils is super cool, but the level design in the first sigil is harder than those in Final Doom. They are so creative that this difficulty adds value to the game. Instead of showing a preference for archviles, Romero really showed how obnoxious loads of cyber demons could be. That being said, the cyber demons are more supposed to be environmental obstacles for the player to interact with, as I don't think you're supposed to fight them, especially in Mission 1. In the first sigil, my favorite level is Nightmare Underworld, which demonstrates Romero's masterful level design the best from this particular expansion. Sigil 2 takes this level design ethos and runs with it, producing another stellar set of levels. In fact, Abyss of Despair, the final level of the expansion, is quite possibly my favorite final boss stage in all of classic Doom. The player is set against 2 cyber demons and a spider mastermind, and what I did to handle this is that I set one of the cyber demons against the spider mastermind by baiting it to shoot a missile at me, dodging out of the way, and making it so that it hit the spider mastermind instead. This successfully made it so that I only had to fight the other cyber demon. Once finished, I pulled out a weaker weapon to contribute to the spider mastermind kill before pulling out my strongest weapons to finish off the second cyber demon. This combat scenario is pretty simplistically designed, and that's not a bad thing. It's designed so that the player can fight all 3 at the same time if they want, or they can do what I did. And I don't think it's a mistake that I was able to set those 2 bosses against each other with such ease. Daikatana notwithstanding, Romero really is a great boomer shooter designer, and his work on these expansions shows this. Honestly, the only guys that blow Romero out of the water in this field are the mad lads at Night Dive, as Legacy of Rust demonstrates. For the first time since the 90s, Legacy of Rust officially introduces more unique enemies to the repertoire of Doom demons. The first part of Legacy of Rust is definitely better than the second half, and there are loads of levels that are far better than anything present in any Doom 2 expansion up until this point. Night Dive and Machine Games absolutely flex their design muscles with the Stargate in the first level, which stunned me with how cool it looked within the classic Doom engine. In fact, the first 3 levels of Legacy of Rust are actually some of my favorite classic Doom levels ever designed. They're just a crazy amount of fun, loaded with absolutely excellent murder rooms and demon compositions. Soul Silo has one of the most satisfying areas in a classic Doom game where the player is beset upon by loads of imps. With the Calamity Blade, a new weapon in the expansion, they're able to wipe out 10s of them at a time, which is so satisfying. I never thought the BFG could be outdone, but the Calamity Blade manages to do so. In fact, if Legacy of Rust were a proper Doom title, I would go so far as to say that it would be worthy of being added to my top 100 games of the 2020s. It's nice to see the last expansions of Doom 2 live up to the experience of the base game, which is not true of the Master Levels and Final Doom, which are the things that I think are partially responsible for the reputation Doom 2 has, a reputation that is hardly deserved. Doom 2 is better than what those expansions make it out to be, and as such, I'm happy Legacy of Rust exists to fix the long-lasting legacy of this 90s masterpiece. And that's the video, my guys. What do you all think of Doom 2? Let's discuss in the comments below, and while you're down there, smash that like button and subscribe. I make new gaming videos every single Friday, and ringing the notification bell is the only way to ensure you don't miss out on my other and future work. I definitely plan to do reviews of Doom 64, Doom 1993, Doom 3, Doom 2016, and Doom Eternal at some point in the future, as well as the Quake series, but before I get around to them, I'll be reviewing Doom Dark Ages in a couple weeks. If you're interested in my thoughts on that game or my ranking of the Doom series, definitely stick around. And if you have a moment right now, consider checking out one of my other videos on the screen. You may like my Wolfenstein 3D review from last week. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games. Have an awesome day, my friend.